Managing multiple clients or large websites? Automate your SEO with Ally AI. Start your free trial now.
Taylor Swift is a link builder. There were rumors that she would get engaged. Our client said, let's give them a free wedding venue. And then we got them 50 links. That's digital PR.
Wix Studio, one end-to-end web creation platform for your agency to deliver exceptional work with absolute efficiency.
Hello. So this is my friend Connie, the octopus. And typically Connie gets a cameo role, but I haven't figured that role out yet, other than maybe crawling websites. So, one question: what's the fastest way to get your whole domain de-indexed? You may scream into the audience if you like, very quick, otherwise I just give you the answer. Trusted developer blind me. Actually not. Well, that would work. I would say have your robots.txt respond with a 500 error. In reality, it might be something else. In reality, it might be something like you're getting blocked by DNS providers for doing very naughty things with your website. But it is one way. And that's a bit surprising, given how many times Google have told us to not use robots.txt to get something out of the index. Andor has mentioned that earlier, and we'll come back to this in a bit. Now today, I want you to look beyond syntax. So if you came here to look into robots.txt in syntax, you can just go, because there's other people doing that better and you have tools for that. But what I think is sometimes it's not what's in your robots.txt that is a problem. It's what's outside of it. And you might not be seeing it when you only look into it and you're like, oh, why is something not indexed? Or why is something indexed that shouldn't be? Now, what do you think robots.txt is, judging by what a lot of people tell me here and there, is, oh, it's a security guard to hide my secrets from the internet. It's a law that bots will have to obey as they crawl my site. It's a tool to prevent that my staging environment gets indexed accidentally. What it really is, however, is it's just an optional set, emphasis on optional, of directives that crawlers can use to save resources on crawl for crawl efficiency. Andor has told you earlier, like 2 talks ago, why that matters. It is, however, also a security risk. And I dare say, I'll make a hot take. You might be better off, some of you, not all, might be better off without a robots.txt. Because it can cost you a lot of money if you don't monitor it. And you have to monitor a lot of things outside of that. So what we're going to do today is we're first going to look into what happens if you don't have a robots.txt. What happens if you have one, but somehow it becomes unavailable due to server issues, or you have deleted it because I told you you don't need it. Why you shouldn't use it as a security guard, and what you can do to save yourself some trouble. Now, what happens if you don't have a robots.txt? Crawlers just assume they can access all. So you would let little Connie, run over everything that he can find as he crawls the web. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. If you have a small website, it should just be fine. For large sites, for complex structures, as you've seen earlier today, it could help manage crawl budget much better. Yes, so you see some example here. That's, for example, where you have parameters, or if you have an e-commerce site with a lot of filters and filtered URLs, faceted navigation, it could make sense. Now you might ask me, oh, if I don't have robots.txt, how do I reference my XML sitemap then? And again, another hot take. You might be better off keeping your XML sitemap a secret. So why would you hide your XML sitemap? In short, for crawl control and to reduce vulnerability. Just a few examples why. You might want to control who accesses your XML sitemap actually. Because, for example, it's used for competitive intelligence on e-commerce. They spy on your prices, their price updates, so that they can underbid you at all times, and you wonder how they make that. It's much, much easier and cheaper. They could also crawl your site. But it's much easier to just ping your sitemap, much cheaper for them. They might use it for other things, to spy on what new products you have, etc., etc. So just hide it. And how do you hide it? You just rename the path like to something that is hard to guess. Don't name it sitemap.xml, something, Connie the octopus.xml, and then you don't show it in robots.txt. You can just upload it still to Search Console or to Bing Webmaster Tools. You can still let them know. Another thing is, make it harder for attackers, potential attackers, to use it as a vector for, well, their attacks. That is reducing a vulnerability, because they could use it for scraping. It's much easier to scrape it and much cheaper, again, than scraping your whole domain. They could use it for DDoS attacks to actually put your server into a timeout, or, and I hate these even more, soft DDoS attacks, where your server just responds very slowly. And if it just so happens to happen very often, as Google also crawls you, so they get a slower response, they crawl you less, and in turn, you might eventually lose growth and traffic as well. Now, what if you have your robots.txt, you hide your sitemap, and your robots.txt becomes unavailable? Now let's go back to that shocker that Andor mentioned earlier, where Gary Ellis, I never pronounced his name correctly, I'm so sorry, Gary, says that if your robots.txt responds with a 500 error, it can get your whole domain de-indexed. And he says, if it does so for an extended period of time, but nobody actually defines what that is, that extended period of time. So that led me into a deep dive, together with my trusted Connie, into web standards and documentation. Who of you reads all documentation there is and web standards in the regular? Who does that? Hands up? Oh God, shame on you, really. Because you should. So here's the thing. There's largely three, for robots.txt, only for robots.txt, there's largely three documents that are important. The web standards, Google's documentation, and also Search Console robots.txt help. Interesting enough, the web standards for robots.txt are largely driven by Google employees. However, how they interpret those sometimes differs from the web standards that they help build. One important thing to mention is that Google may cache your robots.txt for up to 24 hours, unless they find that your robots.txt becomes unavailable, and then they use the cached version, and they might use it for longer than 24 hours or shorter if you actually use the cache control header and you disallow caching, in which case they might not cache it and they might not have a fallback for you, which could hurt you. If you make changes, this also is not always advantageous, because it can still take up to 24 hours until they apply those changes of your robots.txt. So if you wanted to hide something, you realized you didn't hide it and you are hiding it now, it could take up to 24 hours. If your robots.txt has redirect chains, so meaning it is redirecting multiple times because you move the robots.txt to something else, maybe from the subdomain to the main domain, then it can lead to it being ignored, meaning they will only follow up to 5 redirects, and then they ignore it and assume a 404, so they assume they can allow all, they can access all. Now it becomes more interesting. So 404 errors, or any error between 400 and 499, as Andrew has told you earlier. Do I have this thing? Yes. So while the web standards treat them all the same as allow all, Google make a difference for the 429. So they don't treat that as allow all, they treat it just the same as a server error, which means disallow all. Another interesting thing to note, Search Console Help tells you that in the first 12 hours of robots.txt responding with an error, they will stop crawling your domain. They will try to fetch the robots.txt, but they stop crawling your domain. Now, if you have time-sensitive info, you're a news website, you have prices you update multiple times per day, stock exchange, whatever, this is not exactly great, right? So you have to make sure that your robots.txt is monitored, the uptime is monitored, hopefully all the time. And yeah, as I already said, 429 for rate limiting can lead to your domain being de-indexed. Now, this is where it becomes interesting. Server errors. On the one end, they say, treat as a complete disallow, and only after 30 days, so disallow meaning they won't crawl your domain at all, even though the other URLs might also respond with a 200, right? They might always fine. After 30 days, they use the cached version. This is when they cache for much longer than 24 hours. Or if that's unavailable, treat as allow all. Then they will start to crawl again. But isn't that odd? Search Console Help says they treat all errors the same as allow all. And to add to the mix, then there's Gary saying, and it means also de-index all after a bit of time. Well, which is it, Google? Which is it? I don't know. To make things worse, DNS errors, connection timeouts, they will all be treated the same, all, disallow all, and maybe de-index all. Will you be re-indexed after those 30 days? Who knows? Who knows? I don't. So what to do when there's contradictions? Always assume the most restrictive case and prepare for the worst. Or run tests on a burner domain and tell me about it. That would also be good. But otherwise, apply a few best practices. So I have to rush it a little, but just quickly, because I think it's important, you also shouldn't use it as a security guard, because robots.txt can become an information security nightmare if you use it the wrong way. As we've learned, error codes can lead to your robots.txt become a liability, especially if you used it to hide your secrets. And then let's say it responds with a 404, Google assume allow all, so they crawl everything, even those things you wanted to hide. Funny thing here, so robots.txt might tell us where the most interesting files might be. A lot of you might be guilty of this. You're like, oh, we want to hide this private folder, brightonSEO private folder, disallow. I'm very interested to see what's in that now. So if I was an attacker, I'd absolutely try to figure out how to get in there. So how could it become a liability? Because you're exposing vulnerabilities. You could even accidentally expose vulnerabilities of your service. If you download the slides, you will find in the addendum something about Apache service and server status that could actually even, in the worst case, expose client data, so be a bit careful. If you're relying on it to keep things out of the internet, I think you should know by now that's very unreliable. And if you're not monitoring the content, because if you folks are working in a large enterprise, you might know there's sometimes teams deploying without aligning with you, and they might accidentally push changes to your robots.txt. So you need to look at the content. If you have a domain with a popular CMS, so for example WordPress, and you're using plugins, some of those plugins, even though they are not for robots.txt, but for a totally different function, okay, let's say for header images, they might suddenly write into your robots.txt to allow one of the crawlers that's doing something malicious to allow them access. And they might not expose this in their release notes. So be careful, monitor that. If you expose sensitive information accidentally via robots.txt, this could become a very expensive GDPR issue even. Let's say it's client info for whatever reason, an outdated folder of your database. Now, robots.txt emerged, I think, more than 30 years ago as a solution to real-world problems. And that was fine, but it's not legally binding. And you have to remember that. It's not a tool to prevent from unauthorized scraping or access. And Google may ignore it in some cases too. For example, that's an example of, well, I wasn't responsible for it, I worked on it. So for DeepL, we had a link and they had a navigation to the pricing page. And that link, we wanted to track, so not we, but the team wanted to track how many clicks went on there. Now, there's obviously other ways of tracking clicks, and that's no longer applied at the moment. But what that means is even if you have a canonical in place, even if you are restricting access via robots.txt, because you're linking to it from the most prominent place you have, Google will still crawl and index it. They just will, and then it will compete with the base URL. You don't want that. If that happens, typically, you might end up seeing the discovered not indexed report. However, if in doubt, Google may typically choose indexation over restriction. That's what we've seen with the parametered URL, for example. So just keep that in mind. If in doubt, they might use indexation, so they might index your secrets. Now quickly, some practices to avoid risks. You have to limit access with reliable methods, and there are some. You want to remove leaked info from the web? Set them to for 10 gone, if you actually have to remove them, so if people shouldn't see them as well. Or you add you add authorization, so people have to log in. And the xrobots tag none, so that's a tag in the HTTP header. That is much more reliable than having meta tags, because meta tags require that they not only crawl, but also render. If you have differences in the raw DOM versus rendered DOM, then you already end up with issues. So I wouldn't rely on that. I would just have it in the HTTP header. If you want to protect data from leaking into the web, which hasn't gotten into it, then again, require authentication. Ideally, don't link to it from anywhere, right? Don't link to it. Don't make it easy to find. And especially don't mention it in the robots.txt. Extra robots tag then also helps, even if you do not want to have authentication. Make the path hard to guess. If you want to make it hard to spy on you or train genAI on your domain, then what you can do is rate limiting. Be very careful. We just spoke about the 429, but that's what your server gives as rate limiting. If you use, for example, Cloudflare or anything else for rate limiting, make sure that they really don't limit Googlebot, because else you get the index, right? In the worst case. Path obfuscation, so hiding the sitemap, which is obfuscation. You can do the same with any path, right? So just make it hard to guess. For example, logins, WordPress, WP minus login. There's no need to even name it in the robots text. Everybody knows that this is how the path is named, but you can actually rename it and then obfuscate it and not mention it in the robots text. There's no need. You can serve different versions of your robots text. It is frowned upon because of cloaking, right? But Andor also has just shown it. Reddit are cloaking the robots text, meaning they are serving either via user agent or via reverse DNS lookup, so by IP ranges, different robots text for different bots. And that makes it also harder to guess who they are serving what. One interesting thing I want to show you is they are showing their policy here. What are they trying to do? They're trying to hopefully get a legal case in case you are not obeying this. Whether or not that's going to be successful is a different story because it's not legally binding, but at least they're trying to. And it's something that you can do. And then lastly, you need to monitor content and uptime, by all means. How you could do that, I would never rely on Search Console by itself. It will show you what the last versions of the robots text were that they fetched. However, if that is responding with a 404, for example, longer than 30 days, they will just no longer show them. So then you don't know, actually, you won't see if there's still an error, right? There's other tools, and I'm not affiliated with any of them. I may have used pretty much, not all of them, but most of them at some point. But what they do, they can monitor the status code of your robots text, but also the content. However, Pingdom don't monitor the content, but the status code at least. And that's the very least you should be doing. If you want to add additionally, because I promised I'm talking about Search Console a tiny bit, so I'm just talking that in. If you want to monitor, Google are sending you, Search Console is sending you error reports. And I don't know if you noticed, but then when they send the emails, you see that there's an error code here. It's a message type. They have error classes. And so each error class has the same number. And you could just filter by those numbers that are important for you, because not all of them are. If you manage a lot of properties, you will typically see a lot of those. This monthly report, then you get your whole thing cluttered. You don't have to have it cluttered. You can just pull those into Slack, for example. This is an example. If you scan this, usually I would say never scan a QR code you didn't create yourself, right? Information security, but it's safe as well. This is just taking you to some error classes you might find interesting to monitor and how to set it up, even with free tools. Now, if you want to test syntax, use a parser. Will Krishna, for example, has a real good Robots.txt parser. That might help you. Now, lastly, if you want to block genAI, and I'm not judging whether you should want to or not, right? Well, if you want to block genAI or anyone else for that matter, you should apply a more generic standard practice. And you need to apply multiple safeguard methods, not just one. So robots.txt isn't going to cut it, I'm sorry. If you scan this, it will take you to GitHub, to my proposal. I handed in a paper for the IAB workshop for AI control. They accepted that paper. Not sure what they're going to do with it. I will let you know once I do, but it will take you to the most updated version, right? So that you can then just see what I suggested. There's some established methods that you can use, and there's some new methods you could try, because some of that is just suggestions to that council to figure out how web standards could be changed or applied to help with that. Leave me a comment or something. Would be highly appreciated. So lastly, that's me. I'm Connie. So as you see, I turned PM actually. So I have been tech SEO. I'm a PM for search at DeepL. my slides have not been created by people, but corrected by people, right? Actually, so paraphrased it at all. And so you can ask me about anything tech SEO, SAS, and the IRB paper, maybe. Thank you.
Monthly reporting making you want to shove sharp things up your nose? Try Dragon Metrics, the all-in-one SEO software with mind-blowing reporting tools.